Namo Buddhaya, Namo Ratanataya. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings to those here in the room with me. Welcome. This is the afternoon Sutta study from Dhammadharini Monastery, and I'm Tavira Bhikkhuni. And this week, we have very kindly Ayya Marajina, before she got on the airplane to fly to India for the pilgrimage, she recorded a Dhamma Sutta study for us. So we're going to watch that together, and then we can have discussion and Q&A amongst us. But first, let's start with just 10 minutes of meditation. Oh, just settle into a comfortable and upright posture and feel the contact with whatever your body is resting on. Just tune into the stability and the stillness of that. And we'll just practice together in silence for about 10 minutes. Right. Good afternoon. Hello again, everyone. I'm happy to see all of you here. I'm Tavira Bhikkhuni, and this afternoon for our Sutta study, we're actually going to be watching a pre-recorded teaching from Ayya Marajina, which she very kindly recorded for us yesterday just before getting on a plane to, or day before, just before getting on a plane to fly to Nepal for the pilgrimage. So the sutta is Samyutta Nikaya 22.43, and I put the link in the chat to Bhante Sujato's translation. So I'm going to play this video from Ayya Marajina, and then we'll have some time for discussion and questions and conversation amongst ourselves afterwards.
Hello. Hello again, everyone. This is Ayya Marajina speaking from Dhammadharini Monastery. This is pre-recorded on Sunday, December 14, when you may be watching this. I could be in India or Nepal or here, possibility. So I'm wishing you all well, and I hope that you can listen with attention and find liberation, find the cessation of suffering. I also have a little bit of a sore throat, so turn up the volume. Let's begin. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So today we're going to look at the Attadīpasutta, which is Samyutta Nikaya 22.43. Collection of the collections of the five khandas. And I would like to read from two translations. Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, which I'm more familiar with, and then Bhante Sujato's translation, because he has the Pali side by side or line by line. So the first thing I'd like to discuss is the word Deepa itself, the Attadīpasutta, be your own island or be your own light. And we'll get into that. But first, so Deepa is an epithet for Nibbana, and that significance of Deepa comes from the compound Due, meaning two, and Apa, which means water. As an epithet for Nibbana, Deepa is translated as island, a landmass between two waters. In this sense, it's the ultimate safety, Nibbana. So we come across Attadīpa in a couple of suttas, notably the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the Digha Nikaya 16, and the one that we'll be looking at today is the Attadīpasutta, Samyutta Nikaya 22.43. And it's in the chapter of being your own island in the collection of the five khandas, where the Buddha says, Attadīpa bhikkhave viharata attasarana ananya sarana dhammadīpa dhammasarana ananya sarana. Bhikkhus, dwell with yourselves as an island, with yourselves as a refuge. with no other refuge, with the Dhamma as an island, with the Dhamma as a refuge, with no other refuge. That's Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So the more common translation of Deepa is currently island, but hasn't always been the case. And there are still some translators that at least note the ambiguity, because Deepa opens a way toward an ambiguity that's very practical for understanding. It gives a deeper understanding. Deepa, as you know, can also be understood as light. It's a metaphor for wisdom or understanding, but also as a metaphor for the very practical guide to that understanding. You understand? And this is what I want to focus on, this practical guide to understanding. Attadipa bhikkhave viharata attasarana ananya sarana. Be your own light, bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, upasakas, upasikas. Live with yourselves as a refuge, with no other refuge. So, a disclaimer. This is an exercise in bringing over the compound attadipa. Actually, that's what translation means, is bringing over, so crossing over from not just language, but culture. So this is bringing over Attadīpa in a practical, experiential exploration of refuge, since it's paired with refuge. It isn't an etymological or theoretical explanation. Before we get into this, then I am going to share my screen, and please forgive me for being so unschooled in Zoom. So somewhere here, there is, well, that says share. Let's see. Share. No. There we go. So this is Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. With yourselves as an island. At Savatthi, bhikkhus dwell with yourselves as an island, with yourselves as a refuge, with no other refuge. With the Dhamma as an island, with the Dhamma as a refuge, with no other refuge. When you dwell with yourselves as an island, with yourselves as a refuge, with no other refuge, with the Dhamma as an island, with the Dhamma as a refuge, with no other refuge. The basis itself should be investigated. Thus, from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair born? How are they produced? And bhikkhus, from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair born? How are they produced? Here, bhikkhus, the uninstructed worldling, who is not a seer of the noble ones, and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, who is not a seer of superior persons, and is unskilled and undisciplined in their Dhamma, regards form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. That form of his exchanges and alters. With the change and alteration of form, there arise in him sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. So this is one of the places where Deepa can be used as light. So we're talking about refuge, Dipa as an island. But the Buddha here is asking a question. From what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair born? How are they produced? And this is what I noticed. That Deepa as light is like this focusing on the characteristics, on the investigation. Deepa as light is very close to investigation. We're shining a light on these matters. So before we get much further, let me just say that I haven't read this anywhere, and this has come, this summary, this understanding has come through my own exploration, my own investigation. But we know that the Dhamma is well spoken by the Buddha, and there are words for island, or that would mean more concretely some sort of anchorage or refuge, like I believe Lena is one. Let me see. Yes, Lena is protection, Hana is shelter, Tita, harbor. So there are more concrete words than Deepa. Also, if the Buddha had meant light, for certain, there's Aloka, Pajota, Obhasi, which are words for light without any ambiguity. So the use of Deepa, the Buddha knew there were two meanings for that. And both of them can have their place in that Attadīpa. Both island of refuge and the light or the illumination that guides us there. There is, that meaning of light in Deepa, which is in the Buddha's name, Dipankara, the light maker, the illuminator. Excuse me, my throat needs some comfort. So how do you get to an answer from a question like, from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair born? How are they produced? It takes a while. It takes proper instruction. It takes investigation. It takes shining a light, illuminating the path toward that ultimate refuge. And the Buddha continues, he regards feeling as self, perception as self, volitional formations, sankharas, as self, consciousness as self, or self as possessing these Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana, or any of those in self or self in those. But they all change, as we know. They alter. They're unstable. We can't rely on a self anywhere. But before we're totally illuminated, these changes and alteration bring us sorrow, bring us lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. But bhikkhus, when one has understood the impermanence of form, its change, fading away, and cessation, and when one sees as it really is with correct wisdom, thus, in the past and also now, all forms are impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. Likewise, all perception, all Vedana, feeling tones, all Sankara, mental formations, volitional formations, or Jnana, consciousness, all of them are subject to change, to alter, impermanent suffering, and change. When you know this, when you understand this, then it doesn't bring rise to sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. We can abandon those. With their abandonment, one does not become agitated. Being unagitated, one dwells happily. A bhikkhu who dwells happily is said to be quenched in that respect. So when one has understood the impermanence of feeling, of perception, of volitional formations, of consciousness, its change, its fading away and cessation, and when one sees it as it really is with correct wisdom, thus, in the past and also now, all consciousness is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. Then sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair are abandoned. With their abandonment, one does not become agitated. Being unagitated, one dwells happily. A bhikkhu who dwells happily is said to be quenched in that respect. We get there. I mean, that's the question. If it were this simple, you wouldn't need me or anybody. I mean, we'd all be Sammasambuddhas. So we start here and we progress through practice. So let's go back to Deepa, which clearly means two things. And I believe that the Buddha intended this ambiguity because the Dhamma is well spoken by the Buddha. This is the first of 6 qualities of the Dhamma. We should take note of the double meaning, the choice of meaning of the word Deepa. It's intentional. So using Deepa, the Buddha pointed to the island of refuge and the illumination that guides us to Nibbana, to that island of refuge. We know from our own practice, we don't begin with refuge. We begin with ideas, views, opinions, our own and everybody else's. So our practice begins with a preliminary refuge, the word which marks the entrance into the Dhamma Vinaya, the doctrine and discipline, can be spoken almost as if in the dark. The spectrum of practitioners runs from the least prepared and most hindered individual, taking refuge, to the realized beings experiencing their last existence in the sensuous sphere. The latter exemplify the 5th quality of the Dhamma, onward leading, and the 6th, experienced by the wise, each one for themselves. Before the stream, however, one is captivated by the other qualities of the Dhamma, sanditiko, visible here and now, akaliko, outside of time, and ehipasiko. It's verifiable. It's something that you can investigate and verify. So this investigation brings us back to Deepa as illumination, as clarification, as elucidation, which comes from the root Deep, which means to shine. In that sense, Deepa means lamp or light, and it has many compounds referring to explaining, illustrating, illuminating, and as I mentioned, the name of the Buddha, Dipankara, the light maker. So the Buddha's teaching is also metaphorical, and when we speak of darkness, you can see this in the darkness. See the darkness. You can see right now. You see colors, you see shape, and yet we can speak of being in darkness. Our human world is in darkness, plunging ever more so into darkness, into the night when the sasana and the opportunity to meet with the Buddha's teachings will be no more. It has happened before, it'll happen again. Samsara is an ever wandering on with no discernible beginning. And Deepa can also be a metaphor for wisdom. And when we speak of wisdom, we're not speaking of a done deal, right? We're speaking of a fluid understanding of the present reality, the ever arising present of what is, of not being stuck in conceptual obscurity, attaching to a view of things, of what things look like on the surface. This light helps us to penetrate to the deepest layer, the base layer of reality at every moment. And it's in every moment that one must be aware, clearly comprehending. And this is where Deepa really shines, that inner light. Perhaps you have felt that sudden illumination, what's called an insight. It feels like the light turns on when you read a passage in a sutta or you listen to a Dhamma desana that strikes you as a deep truth, which you have already experienced to some degree, or you have been contemplating it for a while. This is Deepa, the illumination by wisdom. It shines on the darkness of ignorance as the light of insight. And for a brief moment you go, ah. But the examples above, reading a sutta or listening to a discourse, they're also occasions for attaining to Sotapanna. But even if one isn't in the fruition yet, these moments are very powerful and inspire and motivate one to continue on the Noble Eightfold Path. Deepa, lighting the steps along the way. This is a passive occurrence of Deepa. It is always available when we study the Dhamma and investigate the Panch Upadana Khandha, the five clinging aggregates as they arise. And here's where, I'm coming up with this and I haven't read it anywhere, and, investigate it for yourself and see if it works for you. But I believe that you can will Deepa. You can choose to shine a light on phenomena, on what is occurring. And this is a metaphorical light, but it feels like a real, really real light, like a beam of light focusing on what is occurring in the moment. And it can be an external occurrence, a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, or it can be internal. It can be a thought, idea. So I haven't read this anywhere, But let's suppose that along with Kaya Nupassana and Vedana Nupassana and Chitta Nupassana and Dhamma Nupassana, we also cultivate Dipa as as a sort of a spiritual quality along the avenue of Panya, say, also as a enlightenment factor of investigation. So we're using Deepa in this sense of light to be that active focus that you can will, you can intend Deepa to focus on momentary phenomena. We can train Deepa to focus with a unified closeness and clear awareness at the situations around us off the cushion. You can do this on the cushion. Um, this this is how it arises, I think, at first. But then you take it off the cushion. And in this way, we pierce the darkness of the moment. That metaphor of being in the dark. We can pierce that darkness to uncover the reality level underlying what is actually arising in the present. It's not in the sense that the Buddha could do this. A Buddha is one of 4 lights in the world: the sun, the moon, fire, and the Buddha. So we're not Buddhas, but perhaps you have that aspiration. It's okay. But because we're not one of the light of the Buddha or one of the 4 lights in the world, our sense of illumination is more restricted. And this is why we use it within practice to shine on momentary phenomena. This sort of illumination is our refuge too. It's not our ultimate refuge, but it can be provisional refuge. Not much of a difference between be a light unto yourself and be an island unto yourself in the provisional sense. Both metaphorically elicit safety, Deepa, in the sense of a penetrating focus to illuminate the darkness of sankhara, of our choices, of sanya, our perceptions too. Perceptions are based in defilement, so we don't want to rely on what we already know. What we already know hasn't liberated us so far, has it? We can instead rely on our own clear awareness in the moment, taking the time to use yoniso manasikara to investigate, to bring clarity to the way, to stay on the even road, guided by the Noble Eightfold Path. So now we turn to, if I find it, Bhante Sujato's translation of Attadīpa. Let me see. If I can share my screen, if I can even find my screen. There we go. At Savatthi, mendicants, be your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your island and your refuge, with no other refuge. So let's take Deepa, Attadīpa, and let's just put it in there and see what happens. Mendicants. Be your own light. Be your own refuge with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your light and your refuge with no other refuge. Be your own light. Be your own island. So be your own island. Be your own refuge. Provisionally. Ultimately, there's a very qualitative difference in Nibbana and how we begin with refuge. And this provisional sense is how Attadīpa can also be seen as be your own light. You know, we're all in this same metaphorical darkness. And as long as we keep looking for refuge in externals, in, you know, forests and parks and distractions, in people, family, as long as we continue to look for refuge there, that's not even provisional refuge. There is a triple refuge, right? The Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the noble Sangha. So this is the provisional refuge, the triple gem. In the same sense, provisionally, Deepa as light can also be provisionally a refuge. Because we investigate for ourselves, like the Buddha said in the Kalama Sutta, you know, when you know for yourselves, when you know you do this and the outcome is awful, you know, horrible for me, for them, for everybody, just, you know, total mess, then you don't do that anymore. And when you know for yourselves, this leads to my welfare, my well-being, their well-being, everybody's good, you know, then we do that again. And this is the provisional sense of Deepa as the refuge of light. I didn't say that correctly. This is the provisional refuge of the sense of Deepa as light. We investigate for ourselves. We are our own light. Be your own light. Be dip. Be dip. You shine. So let's continue. When you live like this, you should examine rationally from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress born and produce. And mendicant, from what are sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress born and produced. It's when an unlearned ordinary person has not seen the noble ones and is neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the noble ones. They've not seen true persons and are neither skilled nor trained in the teaching of the true persons. So let's unpack that a little bit. The unskilled, ordinary person. Now, we know people like this, but we also know people who are not Buddhist, who've never heard or read a sutta in their current existence. And if you talk to them about true persons, they would know what you're talking about because, I mean, aren't we all true in the sense of real? We don't know that certain people haven't been exposed to the Dhamma in previous existences and have kept that virtuous bearing. So when the Buddha says uninstructed, unlearned, ordinary person, he's really speaking of a lot of people, a majority of people, the ones that are lying, stealing, engaging in sexual misconduct, intoxicated, and killing. killing beings or encouraging the killing of beings. So that's what the Buddha is saying by unlearned. So they regard form as self, self as having form, form in self, or self in form. Now, also there are some of these more virtuous worldlings that ponder these questions. I used to think about this question, wondering, is it me seeing through these eyes? Where exactly do I reside? And I was an uninstructed, ordinary worldling, more virtuous than some would say. But that form of theirs decays and perishes, decay and perish, anicca. It brings sadness and frustration. It gives rise to sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. When our self changes, when this body ages, when it gets sick, when it gets hurt, when the bodies of our dear ones age or get sick, come down with an illness or a disease, when they're hurt. They regard feeling itself, Vedana. Perception as self, I just mentioned a little while ago, perception is always based on defilement. It's what we know already. Choices, sankhara. And consciousness as self, self as having consciousness, consciousness in self, or self in consciousness. But the consciousness of theirs decays and perishes, which gives rise to sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. So we don't go from unlearned, ordinary mind to awakened mind in a flash of an instant. Even the Buddha took 6 years as a bodhisattva, investigating all sorts of avenues that were already existing at the time. The immaterial jhanas, mortification of the body. So those are perceptions common in that time. But the Buddha was able to investigate and see that this wasn't going anywhere. That if he kept starving himself, he would die. And that wasn't liberation. He knew that wasn't the liberation he was looking for. So we use investigation, wisdom in an active sense, and there is that provisional refuge of Dipa as being our own light. We stop listening to others' opinions about life, reality, politics, war, cockroaches. We stop and we investigate within our practice, with our own light, what is truly going on. This is also a refuge. It's not the ultimate refuge. And to get to the ultimate refuge, you need many levels of refuge, beginning with taking refuge. We take refuge in the Triple Gem. And that refuge keeps us on the more even road of the Noble Eightfold Path. And it continues. Deepa continues as a provisional refuge until arriving at Deepa as the ultimate refuge, Nibbana. But we don't have to choose, in translation. One of the nice things about translation is that we have a choice. We can, and our choice is not to choose. We can accept all the translations as long as they're based on the etymology, not like what I just did. That wasn't, I was. I did pay attention to the etymology. I just went off in my own investigation. And this is good for you to do also, to investigate, to use the wisdom that you have as your refuge, always maintaining within that path, that noble eightfold path. You veer from that, then it's no longer a provisional refuge. It's probably not even a light in some cases. You're back in the darkness again. Let's continue here. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress are given up when you understand the impermanence of form, of feeling, of perception, of sankhara, choices here, Bhante Sujato, and consciousness. These perish, fade away, and cease. They change. They're constantly altering. When my children were little, and I would ask them if, they wanted a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so one would say just peanut butter, the other one would say just jelly. And then the next day, okay, I would serve peanut butter to the same one and the jelly to the same one. But no, that day, that one wanted jelly and this one wanted peanut butter. And isn't this, I mean, some days you don't like spaghetti and some days you crave spaghetti. Just to use, our quirkiness around food. We have a constant battle about who we are. And I think that's a battle that we can just let go of and focus on the Noble Eightfold Path with a light shining on what's really underneath, what's really in that darkness, that veil that comes in front of us sometimes, and we choose right or left without actually seeing what that moment really brings. And we need to do this for ourselves. Remember, these instructions just point the way. There's no key here, there's no magic words, there's nothing that I can tell you that will, bam, set you right on that island. It takes effort, self-effort, and this is where Deepa can shine. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. I wish you well in your practice. I wish you success. I wish you a light, brilliant light shining through the darkness, penetrating the darkness of ignorance so that you can see where you're at. There's this story. It's midnight on a moonless night. You're in the jungle, lost. Can't see anything. And it's pouring down rain, of course. Thick drops. It's like somebody turned on the faucet sideways. And you keep getting tangled in the thorns and the thickets and the brush. There's no clear path. You don't know where you are or where you're going. Suddenly, a lightning bolt strikes nearby, and for 1 second, maybe, you see where you are. That's Deepa. That light shows you where you are for real. Then it goes out again. Of course, lightning goes out again, but Deepa can be trained to re-arise, to shine on all reality at any moment. It's like your flashlight, your inner flashlight, your LEDs, very powerful beam, shining a light directly on what's going on. Honestly, this is your own power, Bala. You can do this. I know you can. So let's dedicate our merit, our wonderful merit that we have accumulated here by being so patient with Ayya Marajina, and hopefully being able to take away something for your own practice, to be your own light, as well as your own island. Let's dedicate our merit to all the beings, every being, everywhere, those suffering and those causing others to suffer. We know where that leads. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakantu lokasasanam chirang rakantu desanam chirang rakantu mang parang. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you later. Practice. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your practice.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Well, lots of appreciation to Ayya Marajina for recording that for us. Yeah, really, really appreciate her reflections. And, for myself, the thing that's coming up is, this way that we're so used to, thinking of our five khandhas as ourself and as, as being fixed, or as like we want them to be fixed and unchangeable. And so we're then trying to like reach out to all of these things around us to sort of balance ourselves. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not okay with things as they are, and so I need to change all these things in my environment to rebalance and to be okay, and to shore up the things that are disintegrating within each. And when I hear the phrase "be your own island," I think about like how do I bring all that back together and really like focus on just what's here and not be trying to rebalance myself with all these things in my surroundings, and focus on what I'm doing here and shine that light of the Dhamma on it. And how can I work with that skillfully and in my practice, to understand that like it is all falling apart and it is all changing, and that's also an opportunity to keep adding more and more skillful actions that then bring happy results. For me, it was it was kind of really important in my practice to really understand like everything we need is right here. It's not like I don't need to have certain conditions outside of myself. I don't need to know what happened in my past lives. I don't need to, I don't need anything outside of myself or from the past. I don't need anything that I don't have already, right? And so it's about how can I be that self-contained island and really look at what's genuinely here and then work with that as my practice. So yeah, that's what's coming up for me, and really appreciating Ayya Marajina's reflections here. And yeah, happy to bring others in if others have comments or questions or reflections of their own. Just interested in how this strikes you, or what do you think about looking at Deepa as both light and island? I'm just curious about how people are responding to that. You can raise your virtual hand. Daniel.
Thank you, Ayya. One thing that I think about when I think about, the five khandhas is something that Ayya Sobhana said, where she said, the self means that from the moment you wake up till the moment you lose consciousness at night, you are tasked with this constant quest to make yourself a little more comfortable. You're a little chilly, so you got to go get a jacket. Oh, now you're hot, you have to take it off. Ooh, my stomach's rumbling, I should go get some food. And just from the very, very little insignificant to the very big, you're on this constant, unrelenting quest to satisfy that self or make it a little more comfortable. And I've been thinking about that, and I especially think about that with the Vedanas, with feelings, that so often they can almost feel like commands in a way. You have a chilly feeling, and it's like this demand that you put on a sweater, or a hungry feeling, it's demand you eat right now. And I guess a lot of the mindfulness meditation I've been doing lately has been thinking about you don't have to do that. That these requests, these demands that are coming through your sense doors, you can actually just dismiss them. You can delete the email or whatever. And that's been really helpful to me as I've been thinking, oh, right, okay, I'm having a feeling. That doesn't mean I have to do anything about it. And I found that to be particularly beneficial lately. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you. It's like what Ananea said this morning about we are these sensory beings in a sensory realm, and so it is inherently irritating. Like you say, there's just always sensory input, like pushing us one way and another, and then we're always trying to rebalance ourselves. And yeah, I think, like you say, we have the option of just letting it go and not feeling like we have to respond to each thing. And I think it is also important to for me, I'm always trying to look at okay, I have a sensory input and I have a reaction to it and I have a way I want to act upon it, and you can sort of let that pass and not act on it. And it's good to over time observe no, actually, I have been cold for half an hour, I should actually put a sweater on. Because I am also in a physical body that has a wish to maintain homeostasis and not get too cold. But yeah, it's learning to work with that skillfully and understanding when do I need to respond and when do I let it go and be equanimous with it. I think is just a huge part of our practice.
Yeah. Well, and it's definitely not to imply, of course, to just ignore eating or ignore these feelings, but
Right.
more that in a lot of ways they can be almost like annoying little children that are
Right.
just so demanding, mom, look at this right now, and just irrationally demanding, unable to, and you can just, unfortunately, not like your children, you can just say, I'm not hungry right now, really. I'm just trying to distract myself. Or yeah, I'll eat, but in an hour I'll be fine. I'm not going to die between that, and but yeah, I totally hear you.
Or how often is it I'm having an uncomfortable emotional response that I don't feel like dealing with, therefore I will pay attention to this sensory demand instead as a way of distracting myself.
Exactly.
Not looking at the much more uncomfortable, more deep, actually important thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Do others have thoughts or reflections? I'm curious, Ananea, I don't know if you're here. You want to have offer any reflections, since Ananea was part of offering this morning's program. Happy to hear from her too.
I was just thinking when after Daniel's reflection, I remember reading Ajahn Chah advised that when sensory stimulate, when something comes up, we're like the thing, oh, I feel like I ought to eat or whatever, some kind of desire sort of thing comes up, is just to acknowledge, okay, it came up. And like actually Daniel was pointing out, you don't have to respond to that right away. And in fact, it's good practice to not immediately jump up and do something, Now, obviously, there are occasions when you do have to pay attention because your body is trying to tell you something. But if it's like, oh, I think maybe I ought to eat X, Y, or Z, and it's not really like, it's like more in the desire realm, not really in the urgency realm, is to really just sit on it a bit and before, so that you're training yourself, the mind, to slow down and not have, this continuous barrage of, things coming up that we have to respond to. So thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and certainly our monastic rules are really helpful for this in a lot of ways, because we can't, especially around food, because we don't eat a meal in the evening, and so it really reduces your snacking opportunities. And it's just like, no, after it's afternoon, I can't eat all of those things that otherwise I would be interested to eat. It's really, the way that putting those limits on it really forces us to look at it and forces us to understand, like, no, it's not actually necessary. Let's see, did I see, was it Doug had a hand up?
Yes, thank you. When you guys were talking about, like, you can put off, or not really put off, but just sit with and observe things that arise, like hunger or emotional things. That's something I've been kind of having trouble with in a way, I think, because I got into a habit without realizing it of just shelving like frustrations or being upset about something. And it caught up with me about a week ago. And I just got in a mood for a long while. And so it's more of a question than a statement, really. Like when you are meditating and you do feel something come up, like a frustration or something upset, or maybe even something happy, and you're supposed to sit with it and really feel it, like what is that exactly? Because like if I sit with something frustrating, the urge to move is almost overwhelming, to resolve it rather than to sit and examine it. And I haven't bridged that gap on what sitting with that is yet.
Yeah, it makes sense. And, I think a big part of it is, so often something will happen and we feel very frustrated with something, or we're having a strong emotional reaction to something. And, there's something in that has like an urgency that's like, I need to fix it. I need to do something about it. I think it's that usually our first solution that comes to mind is probably actually not a good one. So it's
Yeah.
like, it's like, something happens and I'm frustrated, and it's like, okay, I react the way I have been reacting since I was 2 years old, or I react the way that, I saw my parent react that maybe is not helpful. Or, we have, I think of it as like, we have this sort of like catalog of like ways we solve problems. And, something comes up, and the more urgency there is, that's like, I must solve this right now, the more likely we are to fall back on like the first thing in the catalog, which is probably not a good one. So it's not to say that we shouldn't act on things, but it's like, how do you sit with it long enough and sort of like keep asking, for me, I'm always like, I keep asking myself the question, what's the right way to respond to this? Like what's, and this is where it's very helpful, like it says in the sutta, to like have experience of noble persons, or have people in our lives that we can look to as examples, where it might be like, okay, everyone I grew up with would have responded to this in this way. But now I have people in my life that I see that they can respond to things in ways that I never would have imagined were possible. And it sort of like gives me another thing to add to my catalog. And it's like another pattern that I have in mind that I can use to respond. And, I think the more you practice, the more you kind of start to see, what does it feel like to have something come up and really sit with it. And there might be that urgency initially, but then you can sort of like let the urgency settle and continue sitting with it and continue looking at it. And, for me, usually in time, there will be something that will, if I sort of like give it enough time and enough space, and like I keep shining that light and I keep saying like, what is the skillful, wise way of responding to this? That usually in time, something will come up that's like, okay, like this feels good in my body. It feels like a way that I can imagine a wise person in my life responding, and often that also you can feel that sort of urgency go away. That's not like there's a stimulus, I have to respond immediately. It's more like, no, like now that I've sat with it, I can feel like here's a way that I can respond to this. It's not just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. That's actually like, I feel good about responding in this way. And I feel like if it's another person, I feel like, then there's a chance that the other person may sort of feel that I'm responding from a place that's like good and settled and clear and wise. And then they're more likely to respond well also. And it just takes practice, and it takes, spending more time with it. And, I feel like so often, it's like in my practice or in my life or in my interpersonal situations, it's like I'll come up to places where it's like, I don't know how to solve this, and all of my old tools are not working. And it's really good to actually to be like, but it's okay to not know what to do. And it's okay to sort of not know what to do and sit in that place and say, the Buddha tells me, and other people in my life who I know are wise tell me that there is a better way to respond. Let me keep looking until I see it, and not just say, I don't see it, it's impossible, I give up, I'm doing the bad thing, right? To say like, how can I trust that it's there and keep looking until, and it's maybe not be perfect, but until I get something that's like, okay, I feel better about this than what my initial reaction would have been.
Thank you.
Yeah, sadhu. Come. Richard.
Thank you, Ayya. In terms of Doug's question, the sixth path stage is to reduce the unskillful and the unwholesome, and to increase the skillful and the wholesome. And Buddha says that this causes you to be happy, and also to be not have any bad regrets or anything, so that you can have a peaceful state of mind. And so with that peaceful state of mind, then you're able to move forward into the seventh stage path and really begin to contemplate the mindfulness, what they call mindfulness stages. Anyways, I just thought, that might be helpful. In other words, you're not suppressing so that it's building up like a pressure cooker. You're just seeing, I don't want to go down that path because I know that's going to be negative and bad for me. I want to have an uprighteous, positive mind and go that way, But if you can't quite do that all the time, then you shouldn't beat yourself up over it either. You should just, try, because that's not going to be fruitful. That's not going to help. You should just, keep trying. And with effort, that's why it's called right effort. But with effort over time, that balance will change from one to the other. Going back to the beginning of that sutta, seeing yourselves as a lamp, with yourselves as a refuge. So this has to do, to a certain extent, with Buddha's passing away, because he's not going to be there anymore for the monks. So Buddha says, one who sees the Dhamma, right? One who sees me sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees me. He brought that up in other places. So because he's not going to physically be there anymore, so now you're going to see the Buddha with Dharma eyes. This would be the Sotapanna and above in particular, because Buddha says that the Sotapanna becomes independent in the Buddha's dispensation and the higher nobles. In other words, because now they've taken possession of the Eightfold Path, that's why they can go forward and make themselves a light unto themselves, a refuge unto themselves, like that. And also, one who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. So it's that dependent origination concept which kind of like expands, you might say, out into everything else, because that's how you know how you got here, and therefore you can now understand through the Eightfold Path how to escape from this, how to move away from this. Now, in a more philosophical way, going to that section where it says, regards form as self, or self as possessing form, or form as in self, or self as in form. These are like, in my opinion, philosophical ideas. Like the first one, regards form as self. That's like the gross materialist who thinks that, the body, that this form or any of the other four factors of, they're going to go into down here, what is it? I prefer sensation rather than feeling, perception, volitional formations, and I prefer cognition rather than consciousness. So any of the other five skandhas are misidentified purely as being as self. The next one, or self, as possessing form. Self is possessing form, which I have notes written here, so sometimes it's hard for me to read the text because I wrote little notes on the margins and stuff. Self is possessing form. Okay, so mana is a mistaken thought, and the first mistaken thought of mana is this is mine, and then it's so you don't possess the physical body at all. You just have a delusionary idea that you do. So that's why he's making this the second one here, or self is possessing form. If you truly possessed that form, then it could not be taken away from you. That's the same thing the Buddha says, that if something was truly the self, then it could not dissipate, it could not disappear, right? Anicca wouldn't affect it. So this is that same thought running here. Now, the next one, form as in self. What this means is that form is an inherent emergent property of some kind of self. That it's going to just naturally emerge. It's not the whole self, but it's one of property, or just like cognition or sensation or perception or sankhara. These would be inherent properties that emerge from self, but they don't. They just exist on their own, and that's why, because they're not self, that's why they, anicca, they disappear as well. And then the last one, self is in form. This is sort of like the self, you might say, is emerging from form. Like today, scientists are talking about the hard problem of consciousness, and they're trying to say, is consciousness just emerging from the body in some way, from the body-brain complex, or is it maybe outside somewhere? So that's that type of questioning that they're trying to figure out, right? You know, that self might be an emergent quality, right, of form, or it might be an emergent quality of consciousness or sensation or perception, or, you know, the sankharas like that. Anyways, those are my views. I thought it might be something interesting to contemplate. You don't have to agree with me, anyone, but it might be something that you may think about and contemplate and see if you see any reality in it. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think philosophers and now scientists have been thinking about these same problems for a long time, just in different language and different ways of looking at it. So, right. Daniel.
I just wanted to also, I felt kind of inspired by Doug's question as well. There's like so much there, and that's such a good question to ask, honestly, and so many ways to kind of answer that. But I know, at least from my experience, that approaching those difficult feelings with compassion and curiosity has always been really, really helpful. Compassion to say, to not be ashamed, to not suppress them, to not be angry at oneself. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm feeling this way. Or I can't go, but to look at them almost with compassion as if they were someone else you cared about. And then also curiosity to say, okay, so what is this anger? Where is it in the body? Where is it in the mind? What stories am I telling myself because of this anger? What, reactions am I having because of this anger? And just sort of start piecing it apart and to be curious about it. Okay, I want to understand this. How can I understand this differently? At least for me, has always helped slow it down quite a bit. And also, in my experience, this isn't necessarily everyone, the more you do that, the more it starts to fade, because it's an impermanent thing anyway, and it starts scattering and getting scattered between its very constituent parts and the khandhas until it starts kind of breaking apart. And then after a while of contemplation, you think, oh, I'm not really all that angry anymore. Oh, okay, that's died down some. And I found it to be beneficial, at least in my own practice. But yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, often it feels like anicca can cause a lot of suffering, but I think there's also the way that it is actually very beneficial because if we can slow the process down enough to, rather than having that like urgency to act, if we can slow things down enough, then yeah, either solutions will arise where there weren't any before, or the thing that felt like an insolvable problem will start to dissolve on its own, and things will keep shifting and changing. And the more we can, I think of it as sort of like inserting skillful actions and skillful contemplations, and as you say, compassion and trying to look at it with wisdom. The more we can kind of insert those things into the stream of our experience, then the more it moves in a positive direction. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Glad for you all to join us. And let's pay respects to the triple gem. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Thank you for joining, everyone.
Thank you, Ayya. Thank you, everyone.
See you on Tuesday. And Tuesday we'll be joined by Ayya Nyanika. We'll be offering the talk Tuesday evening. So happy to see them.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
All right.
day.
Thank you, everyone.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.